event tonight, March 26, 2019, history of lynching. Subscribe to our YouTube page, share this, get notifications. We're really trying to build our YouTube channel. We need thousands and tens of thousands of people subscribing. So go ahead and do your part if you haven't done it already. I'm Penny Hess, and I'm very thrilled to be here tonight. I'm at the Uhuru House at 4101 West Florissant in St. Louis, Missouri, which is the center of the incredible Black Power Blueprint project led by the African People's Socialist Party here on the north side of St. Louis in the heart of the African community. The Black Power Blueprint is a project of dual and contending political and economic power in the hands of the African working class. It's a revolutionary project. It's so dynamic. It's so incredible. And you can find out more by going to blackpowerblueprint.org, where you can donate tonight. We're raising resources and reparations for the Black Power Blueprint. You can join there, and you can find out. You can see videos. You can see stories and many pictures and so much information of the last year and a half of incredible work led by Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Shatella, building this project, and with tremendous community support. So I just want to start by saying that I am the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of the African People's Socialist Party, the organization of the African people around the world. Get rid of the borders, liberate all of the stolen resources, get all of the return of the stolen wealth and labor that has built imperialism and built capitalism for us at the expense of African people. African people are going to be free, and the African People's Socialist Party is the vanguard, the advanced detachment leading this struggle today. And I'm very honored to be under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Our work is to organize in the white community. The APSC has a mandate to extend the African Revolution into the belly of the beast, into the heart of white, into the heart of white power. I'm sorry, what am I doing? Oh, I'm not. Okay, so I'm just having technical difficulties. 1 second, but I shouldn't mute this. Okay. All right, so, okay, hold on a second. We are here, but we are working on our technology. We're always trying to go forward. So, I just want to say that the African People's Solidarity Committee, we work to raise reparations for African people, understanding that all of the resources that at the expense of the enslavement of African people, the theft of Africa's resources, and the turning of African people into commodities for sale, the theft of this land, of the Americas, the genocide against the indigenous people, and the colonization of the majority of the planet Earth. So, we couldn't really discuss a topic that talks more, exposes more the responsibility that white people have for reparations to African people tonight, because our topic is a history of lynching, a history that we as white people have to look at thoroughly and honestly in terms of, oh, I'm sorry, it's saying, people are texting me saying they can't hear me at all. Comrade, okay, so we can't be heard. So hold on a second, bear with us, bear with us. Can people hear us?
Yeah, it's way better.
Should I still use this? No, I should not. Okay. All right, Uhuru, everybody. Sorry for our technical difficulties, but we're going to have a really powerful show tonight. Again, I am Penny Hess of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people formed by the African People's Socialist Party, strategically placing us inside the belly of the beast, extending the African Revolution into the heart of the white community, and calling on us to, oh, people can hear me now, calling on us to raise reparations as the return of the stolen resources to African people. So tonight we're going to be talking about a history of lynching. We're going to talk about this crime, this incredible violence that white people have aimed at, have targeted African people with over 100 years and more, and how it continues today, and what is the strategy to overturn that. So I am here at the Uhuru House at 4101 West Florissant Avenue in St. Louis with the Black Power Blueprint, which is bringing political and economic power into the hands of the African working class. And I want to start by saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who leads the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, whose vision has fought for the African Revolution over so many years. And I want to also salute Deputy Chair Ona Zene Yeshitela, who has led and coordinated the Black Power Blueprint and made so much happen that the chairman's taken the chairman's vision and made it a reality with the support of all of you. And so many, over 1,000 people have contributed to this incredible project over the past year and a half. You can find out more about it by going to blackpowerblueprint.org. Click on that. You can donate there, and we are working to raise $500 tonight. We want to get over the 7,000 mark, be able to be at about 7,200 tonight on our goal in this phase of $20,000. And we want you to also join this work, so you can volunteer there, as well as read all about, see the videos we have, see the beautiful pictures, and watch the whole development of the incredible project, the Black Power Blueprint Project, here in St. Louis. So I'm really excited to have with us tonight Kobina Bantu Shango, the Southern Regional Organizer on the National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, part of the leadership body. He leads the whole Southern region, working to build the African People's Socialist Party branches and all fronts of the Uhuru movement all throughout the South, which is very powerful. He has a very ambitious plan that he is carrying out, and it's very exciting. But Uhuru, Kobina, welcome. Uhuru, so great to have you, and it was great to have seen you this weekend here at the Uhuru House during the African National Women's Organization's National Plenary Conference, which was amazing and really, really powerful. So I wanted to just start by starting out by giving a tribute to Comrade Musa Abantu, 19 years old, who passed away very suddenly last week, and is something that's an incredible shock. He was a member of the African People's Socialist Party, very active, leading component in the Black Power Blueprint work. He coordinated the outreach on the ground. And I just wanted to know if you had some words to say from the party about Musa Abantu, Comrade Kobina.
Yeah, I do. And Musa, I had the pleasure of meeting and organizing with Musa in St. Louis leading up to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And I think most people that I know that knew Musa always said that Musa was an old soul, because he was very serious about, learning more about the party, learning more about the people, how no one would touch that flag. The community really, it really shows how powerful the red, black, green flag is. And Musa had a staunch love for the people, but it was never a moment that I organized with him and he wasn't going and trying to talk to the people, bring the people to the African People's Socialist Party and to the Berniston newspaper and to the Congress at the time. He was always, asking questions, really trying to make sure that he understood African nationalism in the best way, and really, was trying to make sure that he was going to be the vanguard, and he was going to do what was necessary to liberate Africa and African people. And you always noticed that everything was genuine with Musa. He was a very genuine 19-year-old comrade that was really about the liberation of Africa and African people. And he was, really trying to be the best cadre that he can be for the African People's Socialist Party. And I really, we're going to miss this comrade, but he's going to live through the party and the work to advance the revolution and overturn this parasitic system. And I just have to say, long live Musa,
Uhuru, thank you so much. And, I just want to say that from the African People's Solidarity Committee, it's very clear that this sudden death of Comrade Musa at only 19 years of age, somebody who had so much to give. He was talented in music. He took every assignment so seriously. He could speak. He organized events. He was dynamic. And like you said, he was like much older person. He was much beyond his own years. And that it just says to me that this reality of colonialism, the two realities in America, the white as the colonizer reality that we would never expect our children, our brothers and sisters, our family members to die at 19 in that way. And yet this is the reality of colonialism, of African people gunned down by police, or horizontal violence, which is also colonial violence, or any other way that brings the life expectancy for African people down so low. And, I just want to use the model of Kobina to recommit to my stand in the African People's Solidarity Committee, to build, to organize, to win all the white people that we can, to recognize our interests, to stand in solidarity with the right of African people to be free, and to turn back over all these stolen resources into the hands of the African Revolution so that African people can have their resources back and be able to have self-government, freedom, and liberation. Uhuru. So I wanted to, I don't know if, we also have with us Comrade Casey Mackey, who is doubling, she's doing double time here, multitasking as usual as the engineer, but I also wanted her to say a few things. I don't know if you could come over here a few minutes, Comrade. And I just wanted to say before we start tonight that last night here in St. Louis, we had an amazing event. It was number 9, I think, on the 10-city tour of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement called All Diamonds Are Blood Diamonds. So if you could just say a few words about it. You were the organizer of that and just did an amazing job, Comrade.
Uhuru, can you see me? Okay, here I am. Just gotta scoot over a little bit. Yes, Uhuru, my name is Casey Mackey, and I am a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and I just really want to salute my leadership, Chairwoman Penny Hess, who, because she took the stand when the vanguard party of the African working class was calling for genuine material white solidarity, that it has led to a whole new generation of white people that are able to, not just say that we're in solidarity with Black power, but live it and be it, and by paying reparations and organizing other white people to do the same. And the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee is Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Obviously, you're tuning into this webinar right now, and has hosted a really powerful tour called All Diamonds Are Blood Diamonds, using the example of the diamond industry as a way to really open the door to understand that every resource that white people have at our fingertips, whether it's diamonds or our cell phones or just our very existence, our lifespan, is a consequence of 600 years of terror and genocide committed against African people, and that's how the social system was born, the one that we live in, of parasitic capitalism, that white people, that Africans have to die so that white people live. And last night we really exposed that to a few new people in St. Louis as we grow the movement of white solidarity with Black Power in St. Louis. And we had a great event last night, raised $700 in reparations, and it was the 9th stop of a 10-city tour. And then tomorrow we're both going to Louisville with T'Charwa Masimba of the African People's Socialist Party, who leads the work of the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis under the leadership of Deputy Chair Onezine Yeshatela. So it was a huge honor, and so I'm really excited to get to speak to everybody about the event last night, and I'm really looking forward to this webinar. It's just really, really important that white people know our true history, which is one of violence and torture and complicity, because you'll see some really gruesome pictures tonight, and not everyone has white people actually doing the lynching, but we stood there, and if we weren't doing it, we were letting it happen, and we were benefiting from it.
We did it.
And we did.
Nobody else did it. We did it.
Yeah, we were the ones that did it, and and there was that. It just shows the reason I bring up that some of us are just standing there is because we have to take a stand. We can't just live our lives and not pick a side and choose to do something. And this movement allows us to choose the side of African people. So I'm really grateful to have found it. And I just keep sharing it and inviting people, because it's important that hundreds and thousands of people are tuning in and contributing to this project and learning about this history. And salute Kobina of the African People's Socialist Party Southern Region for also being on this webinar.
Uhuru, Uhuru. So I just, I'm very excited to go into this, because this is very deep and profound. And I just want to say again that we're raising $500 tonight for the Black Power Blueprint Project. In our overall goal of $20,000, we want to get over $7,000 on this phase that we've done right now. We've already raised in the last year over $65,000 from crowdfunding, so we really appreciate all the support and stand reparations that we've gotten. So go to blackpowerblueprint.org. You can donate. You can also sign up to volunteer there, and you can read all about it. So please go to blackpowerblueprint.org. I just want to start off by saying that I will be putting in $50 tonight, and that will be from the African People's Solidarity Committee. So match me, we have $450 more to go. Thank you, KC, for that, and again, that was a magnificent event last night, and wonderful comrades. Also, it was such an honor that Chairman Omali Yeshatela was there and gave an impromptu, amazing presentation. And we also salute T'Charwa Masimba, who's one of the major coordinators of Black Power Blueprint, who gave a very powerful presentation as well. So, Kobina, I want to talk about this topic of lynching tonight, and something that is known to have happened in the South in particular, but in reality, this happened all over the country in one way or another, and I'm going to go into that. And I was actually reading today that of all the states, the highest level of lynchings outside of the South was here in Missouri. So I'm not surprised of that as well. This word lynching is a horrible kind of thing that we do, where we cover over a reality with some kind of word, and just seeing how they sum this up on Wikipedia, by the way, was absolutely offensive in every way. Just kept saying over and over again that every culture and every society always has extra legal judicial actions. That's what they called it. It's really, really, really horrible. But in fact, the lynchings, what's called a lynchings is torture, terror, mutilation, burning, raping, and slaughter of African people. It was done in the most gruesome vicious, bitter way. It was so prevalent throughout the U.S. It was there also to demoralize and instill fear into African people, and to show that white people would take power and have the power, and did have the power of life and death over African people, because no white person was ever prosecuted or went to trial for a lynching. And while it says in some places that there were 4,000 of these festivals of violence, in many documents say that there were actually at least 10,000 and more. And that, just to mention, when I say that no one was ever prosecuted, Kobina, did you know when the anti-lynching law actually passed Congress? I mean, it's...
The anti-lynching law
actually...
was not passed until like 2005.
Yes, 2005, that's when it passed. And if you look it up, they say, well, it was introduced before Congress in 1918. Well, what the hell? So who cares? Nobody fought for it. Even Franklin Roosevelt, who was supposed to be this liberal, socialist, sort of Bernie Sanders type of president, he didn't fight for it at all. And African people were being horribly brutalized up until, until the heart of the African Revolution of the 1960s. But even then, we still see that there are lynchings today. And I just want to say some of the... Go ahead.
No, I think a number of different things come into play. The one is that it's, when imperialism controls the narrative, even in defining words, it serves to benefit imperialism. And so it's not going to monetize. And that's why I think the whole definition of lynching according to imperialism has to be redefined.
Yes.
But because I think even what they have done, even how they come up with these minuscule numbers, is classifying lynching as something that is illegal. So the legal lynchings are not counted in these numbers, because
absolutely.
We can just talk about the transatlantic slave trade alone, and
right.
The number of lynchings exceeds this number, by millions. So
yes.
we have in this process redefine, the language and the words that they put forward, because they can surround it in the context that said that, it wasn't that bad. And that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
When I read the definition, like, but it wasn't that bad. So it was torture, but it really wasn't bad torture, and this type of thing, and how they come up with these definitions. But we have to, and even just to speak to, like, how the word genocide wasn't.
Yes.
That happened to white people, and even though the Jews did it to Africans prior to, that the word didn't even exist before it started happening to white people. So I think we have to, really help people. We have to redefine the reality, because we had a monopoly on the reality for so long that this is the only narrative that people have got. So they kind of go along with the narrative that this is what happened, but we have to redefine all of that.
Uhuru, yes. Well, I totally unite with that, and I would say that, first of all, again, there were tens of thousands of this thing called lynching, but what you're saying is that the whole colonial assault on Africa, the kidnapping of African people, all of the hundreds of millions of Africans who were just thrown overboard or jumped overboard on the 6-month, what they call the Middle Passage, all the Africans who were worked to death in 7 years, who just died from or were killed and murdered, all the children. I mean, it is genocide. And I think the thing that is important for us in terms of just looking at the question of lynching is that it is characterized by a popular white participation of regular white people. it wasn't just a murder. It wasn't like some white guy who's so furious or, at his wife's lover or something and goes out and kills somebody. This was a spectacle. This was where 10 to 20,000 of white people would come together. And oftentimes they would publish it in the newspaper prior to the night before. Like they would capture an African or two or three and keep them in prison, in a jail, in the local jail. Then they put it in the newspaper that, people are still really angry. The newspaper would incite the people. Extra trains would be put on. People would come from all over the entire region. And it was, as we're saying, there were bands playing, there was food vendors, there were dances, the children came, as we will see, and go through this. White people brought their children, all the women were there, the grandparents were there, everybody was there. This was basically the county fair. This was the festival of violence that white people participated in. And some of the things that were used as so-called reasons or things that happened that were involved in the different stories of these things is one that very often, and probably the most common thing, was that white women accused African men of looking at them or, any kind of lie. And it was 100% a lie for whatever reason that a white woman would have for her own self-interest, but it was often, probably majority of the time, white women who accused African men and incited white men to kill and to lead this terror against African people. So, we can see that it was, as has been said, an equal opportunity struggle. It was something that white women had total freedom to participate in and to be equal colonizers and terrorists with white men. So that was one of the things. Many of the examples of the so-called lynchings or white violence against African people also came about after following resistance, African resistance, standing strong. And in one case, as we will see, an African woman was lynched for picking up a gun when a white sheriff was coming on her land to try to take a cow. And, she was resisting, and that also happened. And also, we see that almost any time that African people had managed to have their own towns, their own economy, and had their houses and a good standard of living that they created, such as in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood, Florida, they were attacked by white mobs who said, you will never live like that. You will never have more than white people. And so, it was all a colonial thing. And, again, we see that white women played a huge role in this colonial violence. We see crowds of white people from 10 to 20,000 people coming, bands playing, dancing, food. And often white people took pictures and made postcards and sent them out to their friends after this happened, postcards of the lynching. White women took their little girls and starched dresses and pinafores, as they say, and bows in their hair, and posed them in front of the lifeless body of African people, and that also Africans were burned. They cut off their sexual organs, their ears, their fingers, and their toes while they were still alive, and sold those as souvenirs, and it was an incredible festive mood of white people. So what I wanted to do was, I have some slides, because we can't just talk about it, we have to look at this, and we have to see it. And I would like to go through different slides, and I have a little bit on each slide. So, and I do want to say that, you know, I wrote the book Overturning the Culture of Violence in the year 2000, and I wrote that book because the party has called on us as APSC to speak to white people and to, you know, take African internationalism to white people, but to show it in the form of reality of what we have done. And I wanted to prove it. I use books, I use every kind of thing, because white people will always say, oh, well, can you prove that? You know, when we say this is what we did. So it's footnoted, it's all this kind of thing, Overturning the Culture of Violence. You can still get that book. And I did a lot on the question of this violence, this lynching, the so-called lynching, this violence by white people, regular white working people, against African people. And one of the things that I see now, 20 years later, almost, looking at these slides again, looking this up on the internet, is that I see, as part of African people struggling for their narrative, you know, as the chairman said, become the subjects of history, all of these pictures that I've seen over the years now has the name of the people, the actual people who were murdered, which is really profound, you know, and African people have done that research and put that up there, because that wasn't always available, you know, prior to this, and it's so powerful to see. So I wanted to go through some of these cases, and then, you know, I'm just going to read a little bit that I have, and I'm going to then open it up and we can discuss that. So the first one is, this happened in Jacksonville, Florida, and this man's name was Reuben Stacy. He was 32 years old, and he was born in Georgia. And he left Georgia to go to Florida, as many Africans did. You know, I think even Chairman O'Malley Chatella's family, his grandfather, and so actually walked from Georgia to Florida to try to get a job there. And he was murdered in July 19th, 1935 in Jacksonville. He was murdered, quote unquote, because he was falsely accused by a white woman. And she later reported that he came to her door. Yeah, this is Reuben Stacy is his name, 32, Jacksonville, Florida. And he came to her door begging for food. And she had the power of life and death over him, and instigated this act of terror against him. He was 32 years old, trying to survive. And Kobina, just wondered, you know, do you just want to, you know, see if you had any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is why it's clear that we have to have, you know, power in our own hands, because for somebody to have that type of power when you're just looking for help, you know, that's it's something that has been, you know, too common under, you know, this imperialist system, and we have to, you know, I mean, it's not even the terror that goes along with that, because it's not even, you know, it doesn't capture, you know, the terror that goes with, you know, by having a display like this, because, you know, people they could easily, you know, make you just disappear, but to show this in public view, it not only, you know, takes your life, but it attempts to put fear into everybody that's around you. Yes. to just submit to the horrible condition and the horrible situation that you're in. Basically submitting just to be a slave. And you know, that's the purpose of a public lynching like that. It's not just to, you know, take your life, but to terrorize the whole community. So I think it is definitely, you know, it's not even any words that you can say that
That's right.
retain lot to be done to not only for reparations, but a lot of people got some things to answer to, and we have to take power to make sure that we render the appropriate justice.
Uhuru. Well, I just wanted to go to the next one. And this is the same act of terror. This is Reuben Stacy, 1935. And the point here is seeing this white girl posed right there. And apparently her father or parents there. And look at the expression on her face. There is no words for this. And that this is a white girl being trained to know that she is the colonizer, that she may not be rich, her father might be a worker, but she is sitting on the pedestal of the oppression and slaughter and terror against African people, and she's supposed to never forget that. The next one I wanted to look at was the lynching, the terror of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in 1930. This is in Marion, Indiana, and that's in central Indiana. I'm from Indiana, southern Indiana, and this is about 3 hours from where I grew up. And again, this was two Africans. I don't know the story here. There is a book actually written about this, which I do want to get. There's more and more information coming out about who the Africans were and what it was, what was the story of their life and how this hideous colonial violence murdered them. And the next slide is the same picture, but I wanted to show the close-up of, what appears to be white working people there. And some of these people could be not more than a generation beyond the immigrants coming from Europe as poor, oppressed workers in Europe, but very clear that all they have to do is step up on the shoulders, on the backs of African people to get property, to get a house, to get a job, to send their kids to college, to walk up, as we say, the ladder of success. And just the violence, the complicity of this, you can see the festive spirit there, and just it's beyond words. Uhuru. I'm going to go on to the next one. This picture is especially vile and vicious, and we actually use this picture on the cover of Overturning the Culture of Violence. This is, and again, look at the faces of the white people, of the white men in this. Look at the faces. And you see, it's really, really difficult to talk about. And it's saying that this particular lynching happened in 1919, which was called the Red Summer. And it was at the end of the first imperialist war, when a lot of African people had fought in World War I on the side of the U.S., but when they came back and they wore their uniforms, they were being attacked and slaughtered by white people all over the country. And it was this year, 1919, the Red Summer, that was, in a lot of ways, catapulted Marcus Garvey and his UNIA organization that had 11 million Africans around the world into, the mainstream, because Garvey made some incredible presentations and also called for the answer for African people to have their own state power. And I just wanted to read this really quickly because my notes here are saying that we're coming up this year, 2019, on the 100-year anniversary of the lynching of William Will Brown. That is the African man who is so hideously burnt there. And it said that, this is somebody who's writing this, and I believe it's an African woman, and she's saying, I have visited his grave in the Potter's Field Cemetery in North Omaha, Nebraska. So this took place in Omaha, Nebraska. And the marker there was paid for many years after his death. So he did have a little gravestone, and it was paid for by a California man who, according to the thing, learned the story from watching a documentary about Henry Fonda, who was an actor, Jane Fonda's father. And Fonda, and I read this also online, Henry Fonda was from Omaha, Nebraska, and he witnessed this. And he was very horrified and moved by it as a young man. He saw this. And so somebody created, perhaps Henry Fonda himself, created the gravestone that said, William Brown, lynched in Omaha riot, September 28th, 1919, age 40, lest we forget. And, and Henry Fonda said, I just want to read this really quick. He said, you can find it, pull it up here. Yeah, it said one of the witnesses to the lynching was young future actor Henry Fonda, who later remembered, it was the most horrendous sight I'd ever seen. My hands were wet and there were tears in my eyes. All I could think of was that young black man dangling at the end of a rope. And I just, I think that was profound, that at least there was one person who wasn't united with it. But what it means, that we have to take responsibility for it as it happened. We as white people have to be organized under the leadership of the African working class, that we will stand between this violence, between white people and African people, that we will say that we stand on the side of the liberation of African people led by the African working class. So, I think that Uhuru, it's very emotional to see this, and especially, when you see a person's name, their age, and this is a real, this story is very profound, and, I just wanted to see if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, I did have a free thing that I wanted to, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that he was, and it's hard to look at him and stuff, but I think he was even burned alive.
Yes, he was.
In his picture. But the other thing is that, again, it's not enough not to like it, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's one thing that we could, you look at, and white people always have the ability, even if you don't like it, you can walk away. You know
Yes,
what I'm saying?
yes.
We don't have the luxury to walk away. And I'm sure he didn't, African people experience it on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
The terror that we have to experience on a day-to-day basis. And I think, white people have to stand on the right side of the question, and that means, like you said, getting in the front and in between this struggle, because it's not enough to say that I don't like it, because you have the ability to just blend in with the rest of the crowd and that as if, you participate like everybody else is. And I think, that struggle has to really be raised, because if not, you stand on the wrong side of the question and you become, participant in this continued terror and lynching. And we can't nobody can talk about, any other terror that's happening in the world without first dealing with the terror that's happening right here to this day. And this is the experience, this is the terror that African people have to deal with
every
on a
day.
day-to-day basis, every single day. And not to mention, his children, you know what I'm saying, and his mother, and the terror that they have to experience and the heartbreak that they have to experience, because, they had the power to do it.
Uhuru.
That's something that's not only unacceptable and inhumane, that's something that, somebody has to pay for.
Yes, Uhuru, yes, I really appreciate that because we have the choice to be there or to always be on the pedestal of the oppression of African people. We have the safety zone, we have the comfort zones, we have the ability. We're the only people on the planet who have a comfort zone. We are able to walk away, to go back home. And that's what happened in the 1960s when, after Martin Luther King was murdered and assassinated, and after Malcolm X, and so brutally, and Fred Hampton were shot down and gunned down, then all we had to do was suddenly, we gave up any political activity and either went out to live on communes or went to law school and cut our hair, as the chairman said, and just jumped right back into the pedestal upon which we live. And the fact is that it isn't enough, that we have to be organized under the leadership of the African working class, because it's not about racism, it's not about changing the ideas in our heads, but it's about becoming organized as the strategy for the African working class and unleashing this stolen resources from the labor and brilliance and genius and talent of African people that we have, and turning it back over because it belongs to them, because it is essential for the destruction of imperialism and the freedom and liberation of African people. And we have to take this on, and we have to look at this reality and, just be profoundly sickened by it and say that, that we take responsibility and we are going to do what we are called on to do by the African Revolution. That's our only future. No wonder we are depressed. White people are the most depressed people on the planet, and yet we're the ones that are the wealthiest people on the planet. So we know something's wrong here. Otherwise, why would we be on opioids? Why would we be, we can't even talk to somebody at a party unless we've had several stiff drinks of alcohol. Why? Why can't, because we know all of this is there. It's under the surface. This is the blood. We walk on this ground that is soaked in the blood of African indigenous people, and we made it happen. This government couldn't have done all this without us. We carried this out voluntarily, and we owe reparations. Every single man, woman, and child in the white world, anywhere that is white, owes reparations. And also, I wanted to say that I'm calling on people to go to blackpowerblueprint.org. I can't, Uhuru Comrade, I can't see if we have some things, and I wanted to see if we had any donations yet of reparations being paid. All right, we have Lisa Watson, $50. We've raised $100. Jesse Neville, $25. We have $375 to go. Ann Hirsch, $10. We have raised $135, so we only have $365 to go. We need $1 for every day. Just go ahead and put in these resources, because this is about this struggle. The Black Power Blueprint, the African People's Socialist Party, is about the ability of African people to have power over their lives, not calling on us to unlearn our racism. Look at what we've done. Look what our society is. We're not going to unlearn something that's in our brain, but what we can do is take a principled stand that forwards the African Revolution, that does what we're called on to do in a very clear way. I wanted to salute all the comrades who have given. We want to raise our $500 tonight. That's nothing for us. It's something that we can easily do. And I wanted to go to the next slide, which is to say that there were many, comrades, the next slide, is an African woman. And this is a famous slide, a famous picture that I've seen. And her name is Laura Nelson. And she and her son, you don't see the picture here, but she was lynched along with her son, her teenage son, L.D. Nelson, in 1911 in Oklahoma. in Oklahoma, Oklahoma. And Laura Nelson was one of at least 200 African women who were also lynched. LD was she was fierce in her resistance, and she was reported to have shot and killed the sheriff, the deputy sheriff, George Loney, on May 2nd, 1911, while Loney and a posse were searching the Nelsons' farm for a stolen cow. It's like, you know, they kill for white property, and it, you know, and they always, it would always be to go to an African for a stolen cow. And LD and Laura picked up Laura picked up the gun to shoot this guy, and actually her son took the gun and killed the deputy. And so they were both charged with murder, and she was charged because she allegedly grabbed the gun first. So also with her, and it doesn't show it, but she grabbed her baby, and the three of them were taken, and who knows, you know, the baby was probably stomped to death, killed in some brutal way as well. So I just really want to salute Laura Nelson. Wow. You know, she was fierce. Mm-hmm. She was an African woman. She would have been part of African National Women's Organization. She is a hero of African people because she defended her family from white power and viciousness, and she paid the price. An incredible African woman. Our next slide is, this is Robert McDaniels, who was murdered along with Roosevelt Towns, whose picture you don't see here, in Duck Hill, Mississippi in 1937. And the two men, Robert and Roosevelt, were lynched on April 13th, 1937 in Mississippi by a white mob. And it was saying that they had been labeled as suspects in the murder of a white shopkeeper. They were chained to trees, tortured with a blowtorch, shot and set on fire. And the picture taken here is prior to towns being lit on fire. So another just incredible violence that we see. And the next slide is another woman. It's a story of another woman, Mary Turner. And she was killed in Georgia in 1918, in the time of when there was just this incredible rash of violence against African people. And what I think is so moving about this is that these three women here are her great-grand and her great-great-grand daughters, which is very, very moving to see. And there is a gravestone there. And it was saying the story of Mary Turner, which is perhaps one of, you know, every story is more hideous than the one before it, but this one is a horrible, horrible story. Mary Turner was 8 months pregnant at the time, and her husband had been killed in a lynching rampage. And Mary, she was pregnant, and she stood up and spoke out against this. She denounced it. She was, again, African resistance, even as she was ready to deliver a baby. And so she publicly objected and fought against her husband's murder. She was courageous. She was incredible. And she threatened to swear out warrants. She was going to call for warrants for the arrest of the white man who did this. And consequently, these white people found her, and they tied her by her ankles, held her upside down, poured gasoline on her, and burned off her clothes, and then they cut open her stomach, and her unborn child dropped to the ground where it was stomped to death. This is what we did. You know, I mean, it's really emotional, because the thing is that our narrative of ourselves is that we're the rational ones. We're the ones with the low voice. We're the ones that are for peace. And, you know, we just can't understand the violence of others. And we have this insane lie about ourselves that is covering up the deepest. There weren't words for this in African languages or indigenous languages. There weren't words for what we did to African people. And this happened near Valdosta, Georgia. And and then it was saying that following that, a few days later, other Africans were killed and lynched in the same way. Sidney Johnson in Valdosta was killed in a shootout with police, again, resistance, and once killed, a crowd of more than 700 people cut off his genitals and threw them into the street. A rope was then tied to his neck and his body was dragged for 20 miles, to a church. And they, again, his body was burned, and this was another example. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, Kobina.
I think, it's horrible, and this main thing that happened is this temper that the Africans experienced, and what's so important for us to be organized and for people to,
Yes.
join the African Socialist Party to overturn this contradiction, because even in that last slide, it's not something that just happened. Even today, when Africans even think that they can call the police for assistance, we wind up getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this system as it continues to produce this type of terror even today, and why it's so important for us to not only look at this history from a different narrative, from an African internationalist narrative, because it doesn't cover it up and try to make it smooth. We deal with the harshness of it, and which says that we have to organize over time this parasitic system, because we have to end this terror once and for all. We cannot go through another 400 years
Right.
of this type of terror.
Uhuru, and and I think that, again, as the chairman said, the African people live under colonialism inside the borders of the U.S., and nothing makes that more clear than this, because it is not racism that caused this. It is white people, as the chairman's saying, acting out the role of the white people's state. We were the state. We were not charged for this. We had the same power as the U.S. Army, as the U.S. police force. We could murder, we could torture, we could do what the CIA does, in secret now, and we did it openly. As white people, we were the state. We were deputies of the U.S. state. It had nothing to do with racism. It had to do with colonialism, which was political and economic power over the lives of African people that was for our benefit, that created the resources so that we could live and prosper and salute ourselves as the greatest civilization on the planet Earth. And, this is so obvious that this is the most foul and barbarous civilization that has ever existed, and there has never been a civilization in history that's ever had a violence to this extent against anybody, and that this would be carrying out, that we would do this, and then we wipe it out and have happy little get-togethers, and meanwhile taking our drugs and our alcohol and committing suicide and being depressed and having to live on Prozac. No wonder. So I would just like to go through some pretty quick now, because, there's so much. There's so much more. But the next one took place in Waco, Texas in 1916, and this was Jesse Washington. A crowd a mob of 20,000 white people gathered in Waco. And this was a situation where his fingers, his genitals, his ears were cut off as he was still alive, and they were put in jars in formaldehyde and sold as souvenirs of this event. And there were 20,000 people there in Waco, Texas. So the next one, I wanted to make the point that that also indigenous people were hanged, and in 1862, Abraham Lincoln, who was the president, did a mass hanging of 38 Dakota men in Minnesota. It's something that's not really well known, and it's covered over. 38 indigenous men hanged at the same time by every liberal's favorite president, Abraham Lincoln, who was a vicious imperialist and represented the parasitic capitalist colonial state. And this is just, the next picture is just a marker of that, put up by the indigenous people, of commemorating that, that violence. Also to say that Mexican men and women were hanged as well. And this is happened in Santa Cruz, California, the most liberal place in the world today. This is what it's built on, because regardless of whether we're liberals, whether we're not, we still sit on this pedestal of this terror, and we have participated in it. And even if we say, I didn't do that, we inherited this, just as African people inherited the terror, the poverty, and everything else that went with us. So this happened. This picture of Mexicans happened in Santa Cruz, California in 1877. Are people seeing it?
That's a very important point, too, because I think people somehow detach certain realities. But like Chairman Amali just said when he explained the pedestal, that all white people, this is how you have your cumulative wealth, is through these elections and through the mass genocide of African people and indigenous people on this land. Mm-hmm. And you can't get away from just your ability to be able to have any type of privileges at the expense of African people and indigenous people. And these slides and these lynchings, which is many, many more, these lynchings should force people to stand on the right side of the question, because everything you got is as a consequence of people being murdered in this fashion.
Yes, that's true. And also to say, and specifically in terms of California and many other states of the South, of the West and the Southwest, were stolen from Mexico in 1842 and 1848. And so, there was an interest in white people to, again, a colonial domination over the Mexican people and the theft of their land. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to go through some of this much more quickly. But again, there is the famous burning by a white mob of Tulsa, of the what's called the Black Wall Street on Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1920. 1921. And I read a book about that. It was a very prosperous, again, they call it the Black Wall Street. Africans owned buildings with many stories that had elevators going up. I mean, it was a banking center. It was very prosperous. There were Africans who were very wealthy, but it was also a community that took care of everyone, and no one went hungry there. No African went hungry, and it was called the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa. And a white mob, again, instigated by a white woman, who charged an African man of looking at her. This was a huge mob went in. It was also the first firebombing by a plane of a community, and that happened in 1921. And again, just destroying that community and destroying that ability of African people to have resources and independent economic control over their lives, which is why the Black Power Blueprint is so important, because this is a step towards the liberation of Africa and the return of all of Africa's resources, and why we as white people, again, owe reparations, because every time Africans have amassed any kind of little bit of wealth, we have taken away from them in every possible form.
And the Tulsa situation, that was actually over 300 businesses in like a 6-city block, where it was said that the dollar circulated 1 to 1,000 times before it actually left that community. And they had 30 grocery stores, they had 6 airplanes. They was a real it was real economic development in the African community that was controlled by the African community. And this was a time when this country was going through a Great Depression. When this African community was booming. And it wasn't just, ironically, it wasn't the only African community in this country that was having some type of similar progress, but all of them, ended with the same type of demise.
Yes. And to think about, we just also make the point that it was only a little over 50 years after the so-called abolition of the end of the chattel slavery in the United States in 1865. And, just the brilliance and desire and will of African people to create their own economy, to live in their own African culture and society and nation, and to just the brilliance to create this and to have their own virtual city, there inside of Tulsa. It just, it was destroyed, and again, it was done to demoralize, defeat, and basically beat down the will and the ability of African people to be free in any possible way. I just wanted to also show some pictures of convict leasing, and I know the state of Alabama was one of the big states of convict leasing, which was basically called worse than slavery. It was what happened after Reconstruction, when the states were given rights again, and basically they re-enslaved Africans, so that any African that was picked up for any reason, and there were so many laws called the Jim Crow laws, vagrancy, all of these crazy things that white people do, but Africans were arrested for, and then once they were arrested, they were kept in work camps. They talk about Nazi Germany. This was the model for that. They were kept in work camps. They had to work on phosphorus mines. They worked on the mines in the hills around Birmingham, Alabama. They built railroads. They built highways, and they were just worked to death. And the slogan was, "One dies, get another." And, there was no interest. There was no stake whatsoever. They were leased out. It was called convict leasing. So it wasn't even like when a slave master had property in an African person. This was just a human being that was a work machine that you rented. And it was convict leasing that rebuilt the wealth of the South after the Civil War. And it went on until about 1930s, 1940s, and there's remnants of it even today in things like the prison farms in the South, like Angola, in the prison in Angola, I think it's in Mississippi, and different, the Dozier School for Boys in Florida, where so many African boys were buried in mass graves and sent there in work camps. And this picture here is a picture of children in the convict leasing, children who were called convicts, forced to work in the fields of Alabama or Mississippi. This is in the early 1900s. The next picture is the torture of an African child under convict leasing, where he's what they call hogtied and left there who knows how long. That was in Alabama in the 1920s. Just this is, the continuation of the violence. I also wanted to bring out the next slide. Emmett Till, the famous case, and who was killed by white men in Money, Mississippi in 1955. He was brutally murdered and killed and put into the river. And his parents wanted there to be an open casket so people could see what happened to him and see the reality, and also to say that, again, that was instigated by a white woman. And in a recent book, Carolyn Bryant Donham, who was the woman who instigated that attack, assault, and murder of Emmett Till, is still alive. And she accused him of looking at her, and that she confesses now in a book that she's making money on, that she lied. She lied, she said, in that. That never happened. Of course, we know that, but she admits it, but she will never be prosecuted. She will never be prosecuted. There's no effort whatsoever to prosecute her. So I just want to go on to the next slide to say, this is an example of this white woman here is the example of the next slide. Oh, yeah. Please, is an example of the white feminist. Her name was Rebecca Felton. She was a feminist in the 1890s, and she was for women's suffrage, equal pay, and many other feminist causes. And then she came to the Senate, etc. But she was a white supremacist and a racist who openly advocated for the systematic lynching of African people. So, again, this shows why the African National Women's Organization is not feminist. Feminist is about allowing white women to have equal rights with African men to oppress and conquer and torture and terrorize, and to be equal and to share in the wealth that comes from this assault on African people. So, that was something that was discussed very much this weekend. And I don't know if you have any comments on that at all.
Yeah. I think, the annual conference, the African National Women Organization plenary was historic. And, it really, I think is a leap forward and really raising African women up as leaders. And, debunking and really not only challenging, but really, moving this whole concept of feminism out of the way, because what happens is that white women, uses African people to advance their own individual struggles and interests that, oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, always, still sits on a pedestal of colonized people. And the whole concept of feminism does is that, is to get white women equal to white men so they can be equal in oppressing African people. And I really appreciated Anwar for being able to expose that, and to win African people to African women to leadership in our liberation through the African National Women Organization.
Uhuru. And, I just want to go through this quickly. We're a little bit over time, so I want to go through this quickly. The next slide is Danye Jones, 24, who was an activist in Ferguson, and his mother is charging that he was lynched. And he was found hanging from a tree in Ferguson, or here in St. Louis. And so, again, this is still going on. He's one of the many activists, African activists, who led or participated in the struggle after Mike Brown was murdered and left to bleed out in the summer August sun in 2014 here, and you know, had huge uprisings and rebellions of the African working classes. Many of the activists that were involved in that have mysteriously died, been killed one way or another. So the lynching continues, and of course, the next slide, where the police murder of African people goes on every 18 hours. It still goes on. You know, it's just the murder of African people by the state and the complicity of the white society with that. Next slide. There is a so-called lynching museum, the first one ever in Montgomery, Alabama, and I did get to see that. I know, Kobina, you have seen it, and it leaves a lot to be desired, but it is the first time. It is the result of the struggle of African people, because lynching would never have a museum without that. And just wanted to know your comments on it. I know you have been there as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, too, we're going to, the African People's Social Party and one of our mass organizations that's headquartered in Huntsville, Alabama, which is the All African People Development and Empowerment Project. One of its programs is the Mother's Love Youth Program. And so we're going to be taking April 7th a charter bus of youth that's involved in the Mother's Love Youth Program.
Wow.
And a few parents to the Lynching Museum on April the 7th. And, you know, if anybody's in the area that would like to come and get on the bus, I think there's maybe a few more seats left. The bus will fill enough time, so you can get in contact with us through the ABDE's website, or you know, just let us know. You know, even in this webinar, but we're taking a group of kids there on April the 7th.
On April 7th, from Huntsville. Yeah. Could you say exactly the website, or how to, or is there a phone number, or how people could reach you?
You can call my number, 256-517-2136, 256-517-2136, or you can go to Facebook. You can go to ABDE's Facebook page and send a message that you want to get involved, or you can email us at APST
APSPSEC@gmail.com.
Right. It's APSP. I think it's matter of fact, APSP.SEC. At gmail.com.
Okay.
And get on the bus. And I know some people that I've spoken with that's in Montgomery that want to come and be a part of that of the Mother's Love Youth Program tour of the museum. And you know, we're going to really, you know, sum it up and really, you know, talk with the kids. There's two parts to the museum. There's the museum and the Civil Rights Museum.
Next
We're
slide.
going to take the kids to both museums and discuss it. I think, you know, just to say, you know, I think it was well organized, the museum itself. But I think as you know, it's still within the context of imperialism. But as a revolutionary, and to put it in a revolutionary context, I think there's much more that could be said. But I think that it's you know, and then what I recognized in the account, you know, is that I saw no lynching mentioned prior to like 1867 or 1866. I think it's something to discuss with the museum itself. I think it had some interactive things. It really laid out some of the things that I thought was important. I think it was well organized, and it had a lot of information where you can even interact with
holograms, I think they're called holograms. Yeah.
They had
Yes.
And to learn from it. I think it has a lot of information, a lot of history that people can learn from and really, understand how we in the situation we're in today. And,
Yes.
to understand the direction that we're going to go in and what we need to do to overturn this and make sure and guarantee that this will never happen again. You have to join the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement.
Uhuru, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to say that I would recommend any North American to go to that museum. Mm-hmm. There's a museum, and then they take you on a bus to the memorial, and the memorial is, as slowly as you're going through the memorial, it really does impact you in a profound way. And even though the party would have African internationalism, etc., I want to thank people who have given reparations tonight. We have Janice Cant, $50, Uhuru comrades.
Uhuru.
Renee Nassar, $10.
Yes.
And Donna Nassar, Renee's mom, $20. Uhuru Donna.
Yes.
Ruby Gittleson, $25. Tama Gadini, $10. Allison Haney, $25. Ron Hudson, $25. Uhuru and Alia Yellow, $25. Do we have a total on that?
175 left to go.
175 left to go. Let's do this. So I just want to say, as we close out here, that with the slide with all white people owe reparations, white men, white women, white children, all of us do. We can't escape it. We can't escape it by trying to go out into the country and work on a farm. That doesn't let us off the hook. That farm is on stolen indigenous land. We owe reparations. We can't escape it. It is like the invasion of the body snatchers. That's us. There's this whole concept of horror movies comes from what we have actually done to everybody else on this planet. And we have to look at this reality. We have to say that every inch of this land is soaked in the blood of African, indigenous, Mexican, which is another form of indigenous people, and that we owe reparations to African people. This is how we got our prosperity, quote unquote. This is how we got our houses. This is how we got our jobs. This is how we sent our kids to college. We owe it back to African people. And to say that the African People's Socialist Party is determined to win, it is going to win, is going to unite African people wherever they have been dispersed around the world through this colonial violence, and to return that Africa and all its resources are the birthright of African people everywhere. And the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is out there on the streets calling for reparations to African people, building a beautiful culture of reparations, which gives us hope and makes us happy. We throw away the drugs, the alcohol, everything, all the props that we've had to live in. We can now take responsibility for our past, get to work, start organizing, start building for reparations, start talking to white people and churches and schools and Girl Scouts and every possible kind of way out there calling for reparations, as these comrades from Boston are doing, and that we can be part of a new world, carrying out our particular task of organizing other white people. And I wanted to end by calling on everybody here from the white community to come to and sign up for the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's National Convention, April 13th and 14th here in St. Louis. Make America Pay Reparations. And we're going to have hats with that on it, MAPR hats, and be able to, really take out this question as the future, the only future for white people, the only future for this planet itself. Because the same process of imperialism, colonialism, violence, and destruction is destroying the very habitat on which all human beings live. So, again, I want to call on everybody, let's go there, let's get $175 more. That would only be 5 more would that be? No, that would be 4 and 3. There would be 7 more $25 donations. So please go to blackpowerblueprint.org and put in the money. Let's turn it back over. This is reparations. It feels good to give reparations. It is something that gives us the ability to begin to have a principled relationship, rectifying. It's a self-criticism on our part for this violence. It's, you know, it's saying that we can't change that past, but we can be part of changing the future, and a future in which this never happens again, and that African and oppressed people have power over their lives, in which the earth becomes again a beautiful and flowering place, a habitat for all human beings to live, and in which we can see our leadership, the African working class, the indigenous people, and oppressed and colonized people on the planet Earth, a world without war, a world without oppressors and the oppressed.
I'll do
That's
10.
what we're fighting for. 10
Yes,
from Comrade
Uhuru.
Casey.
I'll do it right after.
So we only have $165 more tonight. And again, you know, want to call on people to go ahead and put that in. Go to blackpowerblueprint.org. Kobina, I just really want to thank you so much for coming on. That was really a powerful discussion. I really, really appreciate it. And I just wondered if you had any last words that you wanted to give us tonight on this web event.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come and represent the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omar Estella, the leader and founder of the Uhuru Movement and the leader of the African Nation. We have a lot of work to do, and you know we're gonna fight to get our resources back. And I think the victory is inevitable.
Yes.
And, so we coming for ours and reparations now.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Well, I just want to announce that. Where's the rest of my little announcements here?
Did I?
Oh, yeah, maybe it's on the other side of that. First of all, again, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement Convention, April 13th and 14th, here in St. Louis. Go to uhurusolidarity.org and sign up on Eventbrite. You can also go to Facebook and sign up on Eventbrite. Also, tomorrow night, we will be in Louisville, Kentucky, along with Chicharo Masimba, one of the major coordinators from the African People's Socialist Party for the Black Power Blueprint, a brilliant African working class intellectual and amazing historian and powerful speaker. And that is tomorrow night at the Unitarian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, coordinated by Comrade Virginia. Got a last name. Wilson, okay. And then next week at this same time will be the Black Power Blueprint webinar called Black Power Blueprint Presents Medical Apartheid, and we will be talking with Deborah Warren, also known as Fofi, who is a registered nurse here in St. Louis, and we'll be talking about the fact that African people are dying of diabetes, African people are dying of AIDS, as white people are, fewer and fewer white people are dying of these, and one of the reasons is that diabetes drugs has raised, it's like $800 to $1,000 a month now, and people are dying because they can't afford these medications. This happens in particular to African people, and that every way we see colonialism inside the borders of the United States. So please join us next week. We'll be at the Black Power Blueprint YouTube channel and Facebook page. And we just want to end again. Thank you very much, Kobina Bantushango, Southern Regional organizer of the African People's Socialist Party, and end by saying unity through
reparations.
Uhuru. So, I see there was a lot of comments, so I didn't click it off too. So do you know how many we had on the Facebook?